one of the things that I would have to say that I am most proud of is my high school football career. I was always pretty terrible at sports up until football, and I had to work really hard, but it paid off by when I started every game for 3 years. And I'm particularly proud of my senior year. I was affirmed as a leader as I served as a team captain along with my fellow seniors. And after 2 seasons of bumps and bruises as we were getting the football program started, we finished the season with our first ever winning record. Another thing I'm pretty proud of from that season was this competition that our coach added for the team. He posted up boards in our weight room, and he set marks for us to hit in our weightlifting so that we could kind of get our names up on these boards. The first 3 boards one was for doing squat. You had to do 1 squat at 300 pounds. The next one was 1 power clean at 150, or 1 bench press at 125. And as soon as you could do like 1 rep, you got your name up on the board. And the 4th board was called the Lions Club, after our school mascot, the Lions. And you only got your name up on that last board after you completed the first 3. I had no problem with the squats. I was the strongest squatter in my school, and I could already do well more than 300 pounds, so I was the first one on that board. I reached the mark for power cleans pretty quickly after that, too. Now, the last one I had to hit was bench press, and I was going to have to work really hard to hit the mark to get on that board and join the Lions Club. But nobody else was in the club yet either, and as the season wore on, it became kind of an intense competition to see who would be the first one to make it. And there were a few of us all had two down and were struggling to hit our last mark, but it still became pretty clear that it was going to be a 2-man race between me and my teammate Jordan. Now, Jordan had the opposite problem with me. He could bench a truck, and he could do the power clean no problem. But Jordan wasn't the strongest squatter. He skipped leg day. Still, he was working on it, and either I would do my bench press first or he would get his squat, and one of us was going to be the first one to join the Lions Club. Now, finally, near the very end of the season, after a lot of work and grunting, I completed 1 bench press at 125 pounds. I was so proud when I racked the bar, knowing that I had won this competition, and I was going to be the first one to put my name up on the board. And the next day, Jordan squatted 300 pounds, and he joined me in the Lions Club. But I was first. I was the strong man on my team. After that, Jordan never skipped leg day, and when he graduated a few years later, he ended up going to play college football at the University of Colorado. After that, he tried to go on to the NFL, but no team gave him a chance. Still, I'm incredibly proud of him, and I'm incredibly proud of myself for having beat him. He's a large man, but at one point I was stronger than him. And while at the time I was the strong man of my football team, our next judge, he is the strong man of the Bible. Samson, one of the most famous heroes of the Bible. Now, Jordan may not have been good enough to be drafted into the NFL, but Samson, he would have been that star, can't-miss prospect, the obvious number 1 pick. NFL draft analysts, which is totally a real thing that people actually get paid for, they wouldn't be able to stop talking about how his high motor and his explosive power. He's a workout warrior and a real junkyard dog. He's the complete package, a real 5-tool player. Oh, wait, that last one was baseball. What does it matter? They all mean nothing. Point is, Samson, he had everything going for him. He was set apart since birth, and he was blessed with incredible strength. This is quite a departure from all of the other judges we've met so far. We've seen God use a left-handed man, a woman, and the least qualified man in all of Israel as his judges. But now this judge is the strong man. He is the great Samson that we learned about in Sunday school. And Samson is a failure. He uses his strength for personal gain. He acts out of vengeance, not justice, and he commits murder and arson. Samson has a problem with women as he falls for multiple women based on nothing but looks, and then he is manipulated by each of them. He ends up face down in the dirt without his strength, his eyes, or his freedom. He is chained up in his enemy's temple, a real circus act and a real failure. He goes from can't-miss prospect to bust. So while we may not be able to relate to a man who has foolishly promised his daughter to God, or someone who has to lead a small army of 300 people against a great and terrible enemy, I think we can all relate to somebody who's failed. Because we've all failed at something. As I said before football, I failed at every sport I tried. And in my first years of ministry, I failed by not creating solid structure for my life, establishing good boundaries, or owning my own personal growth. And I found myself face down in the dirt because of it. All of us have failed. It may have been a test, a class, or even at college. It may have been at a job where we were fired or let go. Our failure could have been our finances when we found ourselves in large debt. It may have been relationally when we let a simple conflict get out of hand, resulting in losing a friend or a breakup. We've all faced failure, and we'll all face it again one day. Whenever we fail, hopefully we can learn from it and grow from it. Learning from failure can redeem it. But even better than that, or at least less painful than that, is learning from our failure, is learning from someone else's. So that's what we're going to do over the next few weeks, is we're going to explore all of Samson's story, and we're going to seek to learn from his failure. This week and next, Megan and I are going to look at what led up to Samson's failure. But for the third week, when Kimberly looks at what comes after Samson's failure, what comes next, and how God continues to stay with Samson, work through his failure, and still use him for his purposes. But for today, we're going to begin Samson's story in Judges 13. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. It's the cycle of redemption again. The Israelites have again done evil, and they are turned over to their enemies. This time, it's the Philistines. It's been 40 years, so now it's time to move on to the next ring. God rescues his people by raising up a new deliverer, a new judge. This time, he calls his judge from birth, and he sends an angel to a childless old man and woman. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hand of the Philistines." So like Abraham and Sarah before, an angel appears to Manoah and his wife and declares that they will have a child. This will obviously be a special child, which is made further apparent by the angel's directions for how he will be raised as a Nazirite. Now, this is in reference to a special vow that an Israelite could take to set themselves apart in dedication to God, as outlined in Numbers. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or a woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazirite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, and must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink. They must not drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. As long as they remain under the Nazirite vow, they must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or skins. During the entire period of their Nazirite vow, no razor may be used on their head. They must be holy until the period of their dedication to the Lord is over. They must let their hair grow long. Throughout the period of their dedication to the Lord, the Nazirite must not go near a dead body, even if their own father or mother or brother or sister dies. They must not make themselves ceremonially unclean on account of them, because the symbol of their dedication to God is on their head. Throughout the period of their dedication, they are consecrated to the Lord. So there are three main components of the vow. No alcohol, or even grapes, grape juice, or raisins. No haircuts, no dead things. Following these parts of the vow sets a person apart from those around them. It marks them as specially dedicated to God, and it keeps them ceremonially clean. It was also normally made voluntarily and only for a set period of time. So it's unusual for parents to make the vow for their children from birth. But Samson is one of three characters that we see in the Bible whose parents make that vow for them. Samuel, who God called as the final judge and anointed Saul and David as king. And John the Baptist, who prepared the way for and baptized Jesus at the launch of his ministry, are the other two. So Samson is in the company of some pretty great men right now. Men who lived lives dedicated to God, who prepared the way for him to establish his kingdom on earth. Following the angel's pronouncement, the woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he was in Manaah Dan, between Zorah and Eshtal. Samson grows up. He is blessed by God and with the Spirit of the Lord stirring in him. But as we turn to chapter 14, we will see both his great strength and his great weakness. As Samson grows up, like many young men, he begins to develop an interest in women. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife." Now go get her for me as my wife. Ah, so romantic. It doesn't even, but it doesn't even seem like he's not really even met this woman or talked to her. But he has seen her, and upon seeing her, his lust and his desires for her are so great that he comes home demanding her. Now, while it may have been normal at that time for parents to arrange their children's marriage, it's not so normal for a son to come demanding his parents go get a particular woman for him like she was just some more Hot Pockets and Mountain Dew. Already, we see that Samson is impulsive, lustful, and entitled. Understandably, his parents object to this. His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people?" I like that. Among your relatives, like that's even that. Just marry a cousin. We'd prefer that. But isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." Well, nowadays, objecting to your children marrying somebody from another culture or people group may be a bit problematic. In the Old Testament, it's a bit more understandable. The Israelites were supposed to be following a higher standard as set by God. They were set apart morally and physically with circumcision as the physical sign of their covenant with God. The Philistines were outside of that covenant, hence the uncircumcised bit. And marriage to foreign women often led to problems in the Old Testament, bringing down even kings. Worship of foreign gods and other influences God was trying to keep the Israelites from were often brought into those marriages too. Now, perhaps this woman was different. There were some other foreign women who married into and they joined God's people, like Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth. Perhaps she was like that. But Samson's not really considering this woman's character when he insists to his father, "Just go get her for me." Heck, he doesn't even know her. And he has yet to even have his first conversation with her. Now, at this point, the Bible does tell us that his parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. For at that time, they were ruling over Israel. Now, this is not necessarily an endorsement from God of everything to follow is good. Because much of what follows and what Samson does is definitely not good. It goes against much of what God declares is right, and it repeatedly violates Samson's own Nazirite vow. So while this does not mean that what will follow is right in God's eyes, it is a promise that he will ultimately use it for his purpose of rescuing the Israelites, even if Samson is being stupid. And don't worry, God can use us even when we're being stupid too. Continuing on, Samson's parents give in to Samson's demands, and they head to Timnah to get that woman for Samson. Well, on the road, a lion attacks Samson, and we see his first display of strength. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. And he did it as easily as if it were a young goat. But he didn't tell his father or mother about it. He ripped the lion apart as easily as if it were a goat. You know what that's like, I'm sure, to rip apart a goat. Imagine that, but like a lion. We got it? Yeah, easy stuff. Then after this workout, Samson, he continues on his way, meets up with his parents, and they arrive in Timnah. And he talked with the woman, and he was very pleased with her. They finally talk, and he's pleased with her. I think it's a strong foundation for marriage. Mine is built on the same thing. Megan and I, we talked once. I found her pleasing. There you have it. Now, since he finds this woman so pleasing, their marriage is arranged. And as the wedding approaches, well, obviously now it is time for the bachelor party. Unfortunately, Samson doesn't really actually seem like he has any friends. There's nobody there who wants to celebrate with him, so the bride's family selects 30 young men from Timnah, so that means they're Philistines, to be his groomsmen. 30 groomsmen's a lot. I had 3. Though I would say, well, 2 technically. 1 groomswoman. But mine were better. But while Samson was partying with his 30 closest friends, Samson decides to play a game. Samson said to them, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you solve my riddle during these 7 days of celebration, I will give you 30 fine linen robes and 30 sets of festive clothing. But if you can't solve it, then you must give me 30 fine linen robes and 30 sets of festive clothing." "All right," they said, "let's hear your riddle." So he said, "Out of the one who eats came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." Okay, now if you have read this story and you kind of remember where this is going, don't answer this next question. But for the rest of you, can anybody here solve that riddle? Out of the one who eats came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Anybody got anything? Anything? Yeah. So neither did the groomsmen. The groomsmen had no idea either, and they did not want to pay up this bet. So they went to Samson's bride, and they threatened to burn her and her family to death. Yeah, so they're not great people either. So then she goes to Samson, and she is crying, and continues to cry for 3 days until Samson, who was tormented by her nagging, that's the Bible, that's what it says, and who was tormented by her nagging, he finally gives in on the last day of the bet. And so with the answer in hand, the men return to Samson right before their time is up. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Wasn't that obvious? How did any of you get that? Well, that's because this is not a fair riddle. That's not about logic or reasoning. This is about that lion that Samson killed and that he actually saw again back on his way to Timnah for the wedding. I skipped a few verses so that you wouldn't know them, just like these men wouldn't know about it. And so back to those verses. And Samson found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass. He scooped some of the honey into his hand and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, and they ate it. But he didn't tell them he had taken the honey from the carcass of the lion. That riddle is some straight Bilbo asking Gollum, "What's in my pocket?" nonsense. I'll give him some points for the rhyming, but that's not a riddle. That's just a trivia question. I mean, that's what did I have for breakfast yesterday? If you can't answer it, you lose. That's not a fair game. That's a rigged game. Yet Samson still lost. They cheated, sure, but he cheated first. His response, however, does not really seem to recognize that fact. Samson replied, "If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have solved my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to the town of Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their belongings, and gave their clothing to the men who had solved his riddle. But Samson was furious about what happened, and he went back home to live with his father and mother. So his wife was given in marriage to the man who had been Samson's best man at the wedding. Okay, so Samson, calls his bride a heifer. Not a good move. I haven't tried it yet. Probably don't endorse it. I don't know. Dave, Brad, good move? Yes? No? I'm getting a thumbs down from Dave. Brad's considering it. So yeah, don't call your bride a heifer. So he calls his bride a heifer. 2, he goes on and he kills 30 men in another town to pay up his bet. That's mass murder and theft. And then he goes home to his daddy, rather than return to the Mary that just a little bit ago he just had to have. Samson's not making the best choices. But after some time, he calms down and he goes back to visit his wife, and like a true romantic, he brings a young goat for her. Unfortunately, he doesn't know that last part about her father giving her to another man to marry. "I truly thought you must hate her," her father explained, "so I gave her in marriage to your best man." That's fair, since again, Samson did call her a cow, murder 30 men, and then skip out on the wedding to go home. I would also conclude that wedding was off. Now, how do you think Samson handles this? Do you think he takes it well? Probably not. Samson said, "This time I cannot be blamed for everything I am going to do to you Philistines." Then he went out and caught 300 foxes. He tied their tails together in pairs, and he fastened a torch to each pair of tails. Then he lit the torches and let the foxes run through the grain fields of the Philistines. He burned all of their grain to the ground, including the sheaves and uncut grain. He also destroyed their vineyards and olive groves. Samson executes his vengeance on these farmers, not the father, ex-wife, her new husband, anybody who is at least involved in what he's angry about. Like before, he takes out his anger on this innocent third party. And this time he adds arson and 300 counts of animal abuse to his list of felonies. And also, this is during the wheat harvest. Well, the wheat was fully grown and now is being cut, but still standing out in the fields. So the whole harvest is lost and burned down, along with vineyards and olive groves. Livelihoods were ruined, and the local economy was shattered. Now, while this doesn't justify the Philistines' response, it makes it less surprising. Who did this? The Philistines demanded. Samson was the reply, because his father-in-law from Timnah gave Samson's wife to be married to his best man. So the Philistines went and got the woman and her father and burned them to death. Because you did this, Samson vowed, I won't rest until I take my revenge on you. So he attacked the Philistines with great fury, and he killed many of them. Then he went to live in a cave in the rock of Etam. This poor woman, I know things weren't great for women at the time, but things are really rough for her. All of her agency is taken from her throughout this story. Samson demands that he have her. Then the groomsmen threaten to kill her if she doesn't help them. Then her father marries her to another man. And in the end, she is murdered. And we never even know her name. And then after her death, Samson responds to the violence with violence, killing the Philistines, letting the escalation continue before retreating to a cave. And then following this, rather than confront him directly and risk even more slaughter, the Philistines send some men from Judah, some of Samson's fellow Israelites, to capture him and turn him over. And rather than resist their oppressors, these men go willingly, because they don't see Samson as some rescuer or deliverer. And then neither does he. And Samson admits that he isn't trying to follow God and free Israel from his oppressors. When asked, why are you doing all of this? Samson replied, I only did to them what they did to me. Forgetting that he started all of this when he demanded his father go get that woman for him, and the first deaths were the 30 men that he murdered for their clothes, Samson admits everything he is doing is about getting back at the Philistines. Samson admits that this isn't about justice, but vengeance. And it isn't over yet. Samson lets the men of Judah tie him up and take him to the Philistines. But as Samson arrived at Lehi, the Philistines came shouting in triumph. But the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson, and he snapped the ropes on his arms as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. Then he found the jawbone of a recently killed donkey. He picked it up and killed 1,000 Philistines with it. From now, get her for me as my wife to the end, over 1,000 people have died. Not in war, not in battle, but in a series of escalating violence and vengeance. That sounds like exhausting work, even for Samson. So Samson was now very thirsty, and he cried out to the Lord, You have accomplished this great victory by the strength of your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of these pagans? So God caused water to gush out of a hollow in the ground at Lehi, and Samson was revived as he drank. Then he named that place the spring of the one who cried out, and it is still in Lehi to this day. After killing 1,000 men to cap off this whole ridiculous series, Samson prays to God for water. But even that's less of a prayer and more of a whine. He doesn't ask God to satisfy his thirst, but he more just passively aggressively implies that God's going to let him die of thirst. As if God would bless him with his strength and call him to greater purpose, but then not take care of his most basic need. Yet God cares for Samson anyways. It reminds us that God's love is not about what we deserve or what we do, and he will love us and he can use us despite our own failures and shortcomings. Now, Samson's story will continue on, but we're going to save the rest for the next 2 weeks. But already through the story so far, though, Samson has demonstrated both incredible strength and incredible weakness. He rips a lion in half, and he overcomes 1,000 men with only a donkey's jawbone. But he also demonstrates many of the qualities and characteristics of an emotional infant and child, as defined by pastor and author Peter Scazzaro. Scazzaro lists the following behaviors as characteristics for emotional infants and children. They look for others to take care of them. They have great difficulty entering into the world of others. They're driven by need for instant gratification. They use others as objects to meet their needs, are easily hurt, complain, manipulate, take revenge when they don't get their way, and have great difficulty calmly discussing their needs and wants in a mature, loving way. Now compare those behaviors to Samson's. He demands his father go get a foreign woman for him as a wife, despite his parents' objections and despite not even knowing her. He has no friends, so 30 rent-a-friends are provided to be his groomsmen. He gets very angry and emotional when he loses a bet that he had rigged in the first place. He murders innocent men to pay off that bet. He begins a series of escalating violence and acts of vengeance that gets innocent people killed. And he cannot handle or distinguish his legitimate needs, thirst, from his illegitimate needs. A woman he hasn't met, winning, vengeance. So he reacts to any real need with immediate and dramatic whining. Samson was set up for great success from the start. His birth was announced by the angel of the Lord. As he grew up, he was blessed, and the Spirit of the Lord stirred inside him. Yet while he grew physically strong, he never grew emotionally. As an adult, we see a man who is completely controlled by his impulses, his anger, his pride, and his selfish wants and desires. He can defeat a lion or 1,000 men, but he cannot handle losing, adversity, or denial. He creates and he escalates all of his conflict. He wants revenge, not justice. His way, not the Lord's. No matter his great strength, his great weakness will be his ultimate undoing and the root of his failure. So if we are to learn from Samson's failure, we need to start by learning from his weakness, his emotional unhealth. So first, just like you shouldn't skip leg day if you want to be physically strong, you can't ignore your emotions either if you want to be a strong and a healthy person. Too often we've seen someone, or honestly maybe we've been someone, who figures that if we just work on our physical body, we can fix whatever's wrong with us. When we've seen these people, maybe they get really into working out, whether that's going to the gym, bicycling, or running, but then do nothing to work on the roots of the problem. It's trying to fix what's inside by only working on outside factors. Samson was one of these people. He had no understanding of his emotions or how important they were. He was physically strong, and he was even pretty witty, but he paid no attention to his emotions. And we already see the dangerous path they are leading him down. Likewise, we cannot ignore our emotions. Many of us, especially men, have been told not to talk about emotion. Ignore them. Stuff them down inside. But we can no longer afford to believe this lie, or else we will die. Samson was the strong man. He was the stud. He was the perfect judge. He could single-handedly do what other judges did with an army. But he gets brought down by his emotions time and time again. If we want to learn from Samson's failure, if we want to learn from our own failure, we need to acknowledge that our emotions are real and that they are important. We need to start paying attention. So the first thing to learn from Samson is don't skip leg day and don't ignore your emotions either. The second is to dive in and get curious. Samson had a lot of emotions, but his problems wouldn't have ended just by recognizing them. He would have needed to take the next step of diving into his emotions and get curious about them. Where are they coming from? What do they mean? What's the deeper root? For example, why does Samson feel so entitled? Why does he demand to be given what he wants? Well, Samson, he grew up knowing that he was special. He grew up knowing that he was set apart by God. His birth was pronounced by an angel. So why shouldn't he get what he wants? I mean, without some healthy humility and properly considering the great responsibility that carries, it makes sense that he would develop a sense of entitlement. He truly is special. He needs to do that work of looking at his entitlement, of looking at why, and work past that to see that responsibility that he carries. But instead, he just sees a beautiful woman and he demands his parents give him to her. And when she is given to another man, he takes great offense and he gets incredibly angry. Okay, and why does Samson handle losing so poorly? Why can't he handle adversity? Well, because Samson expects to win. He is the strongest. He is used to winning. So when he loses the riddle game, he gets upset. He doesn't know how to handle it, so he gets angry and indignant. In both cases, Samson reacts to his anger by losing control and murdering innocent people and burning down the fields of uninvolved farmers. Obviously, homicide and arson are not the ways of God or the right way to respond to our emotions. We need to recognize our own emotions. We need to acknowledge their importance, whatever they are: anger, sadness, excitement, disgust, frustration, or joy, or whatever else, whatever our emotions. We need to pay attention to them, and we need to get curious about what they are telling us and where they are coming from. What in our past is being triggered? What family script are we responding to? What is the deeper cause of our current emotion? There is more going on than we realize, and our emotions are there to tell us that. Now, you see, I'm trying to be very careful to not tell you that any emotions are inherently bad emotions. Because when I began my journey towards emotional health, I would have told you that my problem was being controlled by my emotions. But that's not my problem. My problem is that I want control. I want to control all of the meticulous little details. I want to make sure that everything is accounted for, that everything is thought through. It can be very hard for me to let someone else take over because I have to trust that they're going to take care of all of those little details that I'm giving up control of. Because of this need for control, some processes can make me very stressed and upset. It becomes very easy for my emotions to become triggered. I've realized recently that my response is not my emotions taking over control, but my emotions telling me that I never had control in the first place. They are reminding me that I need to give control to God, and that in my ministry, I need to trust that God loves and cares for my ministry far more than I possibly could. I don't need to control my emotions. I need to listen to them. And so do you. Learn what your emotions are trying to tell you. Obviously, not every emotional response is trying to tell you the same thing, but you need to pay attention. You need to get curious and listen to your emotions. Instill some practices into your life, like talking it through with a trusted mentor or a friend. Or you can start journaling if that's more your speed. There are even apps for tracking your emotions. Download one of those if that's what you need. And finally, learn from Samson and learn to better integrate your emotional health and your spiritual health. Samson's emotional unhealth is reflected by his poor spirituality, as he prays to God at the end of chapter 15, "Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" His prayer is as entitled as his demand for the Philistine woman. Further, this is the only time we even see him speak to God at all. He never praises God for what he does, give God any credit for how Samson's been blessed, or turn to God for anything. Like, even what he names that place is after himself. Like, what does he call it? I had noticed this until just this morning. It's the spring of the one who cried out. It's not about God, it's about him. Until he's thirsty and whining, Samson shows absolutely no relationship, no semblance of a relationship with God. Too often we do the same thing. We don't acknowledge our need for God until we're on our knees. We don't speak to God, or we don't spend time with God until we're desperate. If we are to avoid the failure of Samson in our own lives, then we need to tend to our spiritual health, and we need to learn its innate connection to our emotional health. Now, for the upcoming time, somebody's going to stand up here and encourage you all to read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro and work and take charge of your emotional and spiritual health. But I do mean it. I do believe in this. Go do it. Work through it with a mentor. Talk it through. Start this process of growth. Do the work on emotional health and instill good spiritual practice that allows God to work peace and calm into your life. Samson's strength is legendary. It is as well known as almost anything else from the Bible. But his failure is just as well known. He was stripped of his strength. He was defeated. He was imprisoned. He allowed his weakness to be greater than his strength. He followed his ego, his lusts, and his desires rather than God. When his emotions became great, he became small, resorting to violence and vengeance. Our stories don't have to be like Samson. Because while we may not have his strength, we have his God, who cares for us, who loves us, who does not abandon us even when we are not obedient to his way, when we're selfish, impulsive, lustful, or hurtful. We can invite God into our stories, not just when we need him, but from the beginning. We can invite his peace into our lives. We can allow him to heal our hurts and mend our past. With God, we can learn to understand our emotions, listening to them, learning to experience them as gifts from God rather than ignore them as we head towards failure. May we let Samson's weakness become our strength. Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for these stories. Thank you for these people in the Bible, like Samson, who failed, but whose story doesn't end here, Lord, as we'll explore the next few weeks, Lord, but that we can learn from them, that we can study and we can see that you love and care for all of us, that what you want for us is greater than failure, that is greater than this emotional health. You want us to be whole and restored in you, and to want us to be one with you and with those around us, Lord. What you want for us is freedom, Lord, and joy and love. I praise you in your holy name. Amen.